The $38 trillion in U.S. national debt is no longer just a figure on a screen, it's a time bomb ready to go off. With annual interest payments skyrocketing beyond $1 trillion, whole states are beginning to fracture under the strain of economic rot. From real estate markets in free fall to disappearing jobs and dried-up tax revenue, the coming recession won't be confined to Wall Street. It's going to obliterate state economies that are already overwhelmed by debt, inflation, and population flight. Don't be fooled by the rosy GDP numbers. America's very foundation is fracturing. Here are the 15 states poised to collapse first as the United States slides into its next great economic crisis. Kicking off the list at number 15 is Washington. Once a beacon of American prosperity and forward-thinking innovation, the state of Washington is now teetering on the brink of a massive financial crisis. Hidden beneath Seattle's gleaming skyline and the sprawling tech campuses in Redmond is a profound structural weakness that threatens to send the state spiraling into failure. As the next recession looms, homes in the Seattle metro area are still fetching nearly $790,000, while paychecks have been decimated by inflation. A median household income of $97,000 might sound impressive, but once you factor in taxes, housing costs, and healthcare, countless families find themselves with virtually nothing left to put away. Washington's economy is dangerously reliant on a handful of industries: technology, aerospace, and shipping. Giants like Amazon, Microsoft, and Boeing provide jobs for over 400,000 people. But these are the very companies now aggressively cutting costs, implementing hiring freezes, and moving their operations overseas. If the country's recession gets worse, a mere 10% reduction in staff at these corporations would instantly wipe out more than 40,000 jobs, worsening the homelessness crisis in cities that are already overwhelmed with a staggering 52,000 people living on the streets. Compounding this is Washington's punishing tax system. With steep sales and property taxes but no state income tax, the middle class is being squeezed dry, and the government is left dangerously dependent on unpredictable revenue sources that will evaporate in a downturn. Every single percentage point drop in what consumers spend could blow a hole of hundreds of millions of dollars in Olympia's budget, leading to everything from a spike in mortgage defaults to the hollowing out of retail districts. The glossy veneer of Washington's prosperity is hiding a gathering economic hurricane. Once the recession truly bites, a perfect storm of tech layoffs, soaring living costs, and an unstable tax base could trigger a complete state-level meltdown, revealing how even America's most celebrated states are built on a foundation of shaky optimism and borrowed time. At number 14, we have Alaska. Alaska might seem insulated from the country's financial turmoil, but in reality, its economy is among the most vulnerable in the entire United States. With only 730,000 residents, the state's fate is almost entirely dependent on the oil industry, which still generates nearly 85% of its income. When the price of oil drops, Alaska's whole economic structure implodes. Back in 2020, when crude oil fell below $40 a barrel, the state's tax revenue vanished by $1.5 billion practically overnight. With global demand slowing and the world's energy investments shifting toward renewables, Alaska is staring down a systemic crisis that no temporary oil boom can solve. The cost of living is also becoming unbearable. A typical grocery run in Anchorage costs 35% more than the national average, and home heating bills have jumped by 28% in just 1 year. The median home sells for about $400,000, while the average family brings in around $86,000, which leaves no buffer as inflation devours their savings. A recession would devastate families in a state that has already seen people leaving for 6 consecutive years as younger workers escape to more affordable places. The other two mainstays of Alaska's economy, tourism and fishing, are also in trouble. The number of cruise ship visitors dropped by 40% after the pandemic and has never fully bounced back. At the same time, the commercial fishing sector, once a $5 billion powerhouse, has been gutted by dwindling salmon populations and new restrictions on exports. The state government's emergency savings account, which once held more than $17 billion, has been depleted to under $3 billion. If another recession hits, Alaska might find itself unable to cover its basic expenses like pensions or even the upkeep of essential infrastructure in its more isolated communities. For a state with such immense natural wealth, Alaska's economy is shockingly fragile and one note. As the U.S. recession deepens, the state won't just experience a slowdown. It will face a financial catastrophe that cuts it off from the very national prosperity it once helped to build. Coming in at number 13, Louisiana. Louisiana is perched on the edge of an economic catastrophe. Despite being responsible for 10% of the nation's entire energy production, it consistently ranks near the very bottom for household income and employment security. The typical family income is just $57,000 a year, and nearly 18% of the population lives in poverty, which is one of the worst rates in the nation. The state is already struggling with over $20 billion in debt and a budget deficit that keeps expanding, meaning that even a minor recession could completely shatter public services and critical infrastructure. The oil and gas sector, which has long been Louisiana's economic lifeline, is no longer the reliable anchor it once was. Major shifts in the global energy market, coupled with tougher climate regulations, have already forced refineries and petrochemical facilities to shut down. More than 12,000 energy-related jobs disappeared between 2020 and 2024, and new investments have all but stopped. Whenever oil prices slump or export numbers fall, Louisiana's state budget loses hundreds of millions of dollars, forcing drastic cuts to schools and hospitals. On top of that, the state is under constant threat from the climate. Each hurricane season now inflicts billions of dollars in damage. Hurricane Ida by itself caused an estimated $75 billion in destruction. At the same time, coastal erosion is wiping out land at the astonishing rate of one football field every 100 minutes, putting whole towns and vital industrial areas at risk. Tourism, another crucial revenue stream, hasn't fully bounced back. Hotel occupancy in New Orleans is still down 15% compared to before the pandemic, while soaring crime rates and insurance premiums are scaring off potential investors. In the meantime, the housing market has become completely unaffordable, with home insurance costs jumping by a staggering 63% in only 3 years. Louisiana's entire economy rests on a shaky foundation, dangerously reliant on fossil fuels and exposed to devastating natural disasters, all made worse by years of poor government oversight. As the national recession tightens its grip, Louisiana is on track for a catastrophic domino effect of mass unemployment and a large-scale exodus of its population, leading to a fiscal meltdown that will leave its cities and key industries fighting for their very existence. Number 12 is Arizona. Once hailed as a land of boundless opportunity, Arizona is now facing a financial catastrophe. Its population swelled to over 7.5 million people, but that rapid expansion came at a steep price: a dangerously inflated housing market, depleted water supplies, and an unsustainable level of infrastructure debt. The typical home price in the Phoenix area skyrocketed to $435,000, a nearly 60% increase since 2019, while the average family's income has remained stuck at around $74,000. With mortgage rates now exceeding 7%, homeownership is out of reach for many, and foreclosure notices have shot up by 45% in just the last year. But Arizona's water shortage could be the final straw that breaks its economy. The state gets 36% of its water from the rapidly diminishing Colorado River. In 2025, federal mandates cutting water access have already hit farms hard, leading to smaller crop yields and a $1.3 billion loss in agricultural income. Major cities like Scottsdale and Mesa are now telling their citizens to prepare for water rationing, a move that could send property values plummeting across the state. At the same time, Arizona's job market, which was once booming thanks to construction and tech, is rapidly deteriorating. Intel has pumped the brakes on its chip plant expansion, and new home construction permits have cratered, falling 41% since 2022, all clear signs of what's ahead. Widespread layoffs have begun. Retail spaces in the Phoenix suburbs are sitting empty, and the homeless population has swelled by 31% since 2020. The tourism industry, which brings in $28 billion each year, is also weakening as people nationwide tighten their budgets and travel less. Arizona's brutal summer temperatures, which frequently exceed 115 degrees Fahrenheit, are making it a less appealing destination for retirees, causing a decline in new residents for the first time in over a decade. With its housing market on thin ice, its rivers running dry, and its heavy reliance on consumer spending, Arizona is in a perilous position. When the U.S. recession takes a deeper dive, this desert boomtown could go from thriving to insolvent faster than nearly any other state in the Sun Belt. At number 11, we find New Jersey. On paper, New Jersey ranks as one of the country's most affluent states, but in reality, it's being crushed by deep-seated debt and a cost of living that has become unbearable. The state's total public debt has ballooned to over $240 billion, which comes out to more than $26,000 for every single resident, one of the heaviest debt loads in the entire country. Homeowners are getting absolutely crushed by property taxes, which are now averaging $9,800 a year, and that's on top of living expenses that are already 15% higher than the national average right as a recession looms. The state's delicate balancing act between prosperity and debt is set to shatter. New Jersey's economy is completely hitched to finance, pharmaceuticals, and real estate, the three sectors that get hit first and hardest in any downturn. The business districts in New York and Jersey City are already turning into ghost towns, with office vacancy rates soaring past 25% as corporations flee to cheaper states, gutting the local job market. Even the state's legendary pharmaceutical industry, once the jewel of the Garden State, has bled over 20,000 jobs in the last decade to automation and outsourcing. Meanwhile, a fiscal time bomb is ticking in the state's pension system, which is catastrophically underfunded, facing a shortfall that exceeds $95 billion. A downturn in the market would instantly make that hole deeper, forcing devastating budget cuts. On top of all that, the state itself is physically crumbling. More than 40% of New Jersey's roads are in poor condition, a clear sign that the state's economic engine is seizing up. Housing represents another major point of failure. The typical home costs around $520,000, while the average rent is a punishing $2,200 a month. Both figures are completely out of reach for families, making the median income of $97,000. With interest rates and insurance costs climbing, the number of people falling behind on their mortgages is quietly rising. New Jersey's toxic cocktail of high taxes, massive debt, and reliance on unstable industries makes it a prime candidate for collapse. The moment the next recession truly takes hold, even a small dip in Wall Street earnings or housing prices could kick off a financial chain reaction, leaving New Jersey's residents stuck with a bill their own state is too broke to pay. At number 10 is Indiana. While the state's economy might appear steady from a distance, its very foundation is dangerously unstable. Manufacturing accounts for nearly 27% of its economic output, one of the heaviest concentrations in the entire country. That over-reliance becomes a fatal flaw in a recession, when international demand plummets and factory orders completely vanish. In the year 2024 alone, Indiana watched 18,000 industrial jobs disappear, and experts are warning that another 40,000 could be wiped out if the U.S. economy takes a serious nosedive. The auto industry is in a particularly precarious position. Factories in cities like Kokomo, Fort Wayne, and Lafayette are deeply dependent on foreign exports and supply chains linked to China and Mexico. With rising global trade conflicts and slowing investments in electric vehicles, Indiana's factory towns are facing the threat of unemployment surging past 9%, a chilling reminder of the 2008 financial crisis. At the same time, the ability to afford a home is evaporating. The median house price has skyrocketed to $275,000, a 35% increase since 2020, while wages have hardly grown at all. Rural families, who were already struggling with flat paychecks, are now being slammed by record-breaking utility and food costs, which have jumped 19% in just 2 years. The state government, though known for being fiscally cautious, gets its money from sales and income taxes revenue streams that dry up in a recession. Even a modest 5% drop in revenue could tear a $1 billion hole in the state budget. Public schools, healthcare services, and infrastructure projects would be the first to face the axe. Ironically, Indiana's core strength, its identity as a low-cost industrial powerhouse, could be its greatest undoing in a downturn. As the factories go dark, small towns will lose their economic lifeblood, property values will crash, and local businesses will shut their doors for good. If the next recession hits hard, Indiana will face more than just layoffs. It's headed for a full-scale economic unraveling that will lay bare just how fragile America's manufacturing heartland has become. Number 9. Texas. Texas likes to project an image of being recession-proof, but that bravado conceals a severe structural weakness. The state's $2.8 trillion economy is built on shaky ground, relying on volatile industries like energy, tech, and real estate. All three are now sending out major warning signals. The oil industry powers nearly 15% of the state's GDP, but prices have tumbled from $110 a barrel down to $78, stripping billions from state coffers. Meanwhile, its housing market is a paradox, both overheating and cracking at the same time. The average home price in Texas has shot up to $335,000, a 45% surge since 2019. But with mortgage rates now over 7%, sales have cratered by almost 40%. In Austin, the market is flooded with unsold homes, a 78% jump from last year, which points to an imminent price correction. Rents in major cities like Dallas and Houston have climbed past $1,800 a month, siphoning money away from household budgets and consumer activity. Texas is also grappling with a hidden fiscal emergency. Its population is exploding by nearly 1,200 people every day, putting an incredible strain on its infrastructure, water supplies, and energy grid. The catastrophic power grid failure in 2021 inflicted $130 billion in damages, and the system is still dangerously unreliable. In a deep recession, any drop in tax revenue could cripple the state's already overstretched public services. Layoffs at major corporations are also picking up speed. Tesla, Dell, and Amazon, some of the biggest employers in Texas, have all started cutting staff. If unemployment climbs to 6%, the state could shed over 400,000 jobs in just a few months. On top of that, the rising cost of insurance due to climate-fueled disasters like hurricanes, floods, and droughts is starting to chase businesses away. When the next downturn fully arrives, Texas's myth of endless prosperity could be shattered. A state that built its success on cheap labor, mass migration, and oil money could soon find itself choked by falling energy revenue, a collapsing housing market, and a mountain of debt it can no longer manage. Number 8. Nevada. Nevada's economy is entirely dependent on people spending money, which makes it one of the first states to fall apart whenever the U.S. hits a recession. Nearly a third of its entire economy is tied directly to tourism, hotels, and entertainment, all centered on Las Vegas. But the moment Americans cut back on travel and gambling, this glittering desert oasis grinds to a halt. During the 2020 downturn, Nevada's unemployment rate exploded to 28.2%, the worst in the entire country. Now, all the same warning signs are flashing again. In 2025, spending by visitors is already tapering off, with hotel bookings down 12% compared to last year and casino revenues sliding by 8%. The casinos, which provide jobs for over 350,000 people, have started reducing work shifts and are putting new construction projects on hold. A major recession could wipe out tens of thousands of jobs, unleashing another devastating wave of home foreclosures. This is a nightmare Nevada has lived through before. The state still has one of the highest foreclosure rates in America, and house prices have already dropped 7% from their recent highs. Away from the Vegas Strip, Nevada's issues are even more severe. The housing bubble in Henderson and Reno, which was inflated by Californians looking for cheaper living, is now losing air fast. The typical home in Reno costs $565,000. That price is now completely out of reach for anyone making less than $90,000 a year. As people stop moving in and interest rates stay elevated, construction jobs, which account for another 10% of the workforce, are vanishing. The state's sources of tax revenue are dangerously limited, depending almost entirely on tourism and sales taxes. When the tourists disappear, the government's income evaporates. With more than $18 billion in public debt and growing demands for infrastructure, Nevada is facing the threat of huge budget cuts to schools, healthcare, and housing assistance. When the next U.S. recession hits with its full power, Nevada's glamorous image will quickly disintegrate, revealing a house of cards. Economy built on casinos, tourism, and debt. Underneath all the neon, the cracks in this desert mirage are growing wider. Number 7. Hawaii. The postcard image of paradise in Hawaii conceals one of the most economically fragile states in the nation. Tourism is the engine for nearly a quarter of its entire economy, but that extreme reliance becomes a complete catastrophe when a recession hits. In 2020, the number of visitor arrivals plummeted by 75%, and the state's unemployment rate skyrocketed to 22%, the second highest in American history. Today, Hawaii is marching toward the very same precipice. Tourist numbers are dropping once more as the costs of flights and hotels become prohibitive. The average nightly rate for a hotel in Honolulu has now climbed above $380. A family getaway to Hawaii can now easily run $8,000, putting it far beyond the reach of middle-class vacationers. The median home price on the island of Oahu is an astonishing $1.1 million, and the average rent in Honolulu is $2,700. For families in Hawaii already stretched to their breaking point, a recession means there's nothing left to sacrifice. Their only option is to pack up and go. For 6 consecutive years, the state's population has been shrinking, and the flow of people leaving is only getting faster. The state's own books are just as shaky. Hawaii is buried under more than $26 billion in debt, and its income relies almost entirely on tourist dollars. A small dip in tourism is all it would take to blow a huge hole in the state budget. Making matters worse is the island's dependence on the mainland. Over 85% of all goods are shipped in, setting the stage for a perfect economic storm the moment a U.S. recession washes ashore. So, the problem isn't just fewer vacationers. It's the complete gutting of the middle class, a mass departure of its own people, and an economy that can no longer afford to keep the fantasy of paradise alive. Coming in at number 6 is New York. While it may be the financial capital of America, it's also one of the country's greatest recession liabilities. The state's massive $2.6 trillion economy is dangerously dependent on 3 pillars: Wall Street, real estate, and the corporate sector. When the market takes a nosedive, New York is the first to feel the pain. A mere 10% drop in Wall Street profits can wipe out $6 billion in tax revenue for the state, a loss that forces drastic cuts to essential services like schools, housing, and public transportation. The commercial heart of the city, Manhattan's office district, is already imploding. A staggering 21% of offices sit empty, a level not seen since 1994, as the shift to remote work has destroyed the demand for these spaces. In some neighborhoods, property values have plummeted by almost 30%, putting the city's entire $60 billion property tax foundation at risk. If a recession hits, that could create a deficit of over $8 billion, leading directly to mass layoffs of government employees and the shutdown of city-run programs. At the same time, life is becoming impossibly expensive. The typical rent in New York City just topped $4,200 a month, while the average house price in the surrounding suburbs is hovering at about $740,000. With inflation continuing to squeeze budgets, even people with high-paying jobs are finding it hard to make ends meet. More than 40% of New Yorkers say that over half of every paycheck goes straight to their rent or mortgage, and people are already voting with their feet. Since 2020, the state has lost over 650,000 residents, a drain on both tax income and the workforce. In Manhattan, more than 18% of storefronts are now empty, while the city's small businesses are struggling with some of the nation's most extreme operating costs. Pile on top of that a state debt of $390 billion and unfunded pension promises of over $300 billion more. And you have a financial time bomb. As the recession gets worse, job losses in the finance world, along with real estate and tech, will send shockwaves through the entire state, gutting its tax revenue and shattering its delicate economic rebound. For a century, New York was a symbol of financial might. In the next downturn, it could become a symbol of how fast that strength can disappear. At number 5, we have Delaware. It might be a tiny state with fewer than 1 million people, but its economy is one of the most vulnerable in the whole country. The state's entire economic structure is built on corporate paperwork, finance, and banking, the very sectors that get hammered the hardest when the economy sours. More than 60% of the Fortune 500 are incorporated in Delaware, but the vast majority have no physical presence there at all. This means that when the financial markets even twitch, Delaware's income evaporates overnight. In 2025, a stunning 41% of the state's revenue came from corporate filing fees and franchise taxes alone, a totally unsustainable model. If corporations start to downsize or disappear, one bad turn in the market could vaporize $1.5 billion from the state budget in an instant, throwing Delaware deep into the red. This exact scenario played out in the 2008 crisis, when the number of new business registrations fell by 38% in a single year. All the while, regular families are being crushed by rising costs. The typical home now costs $390,000, a 47% jump in just 5 years, and rents in Wilmington are climbing past $1,700 a month. With a small labor force of just 500,000 active workers, any job losses in the finance or healthcare sectors spread like wildfire. A national recession that trims just 2% of jobs nationwide could mean 10,000 lost jobs in Delaware, wiping out the equivalent of an entire small city's economy. Even the port of Wilmington, a major hub for goods like produce and chemicals, is feeling the pressure from a worldwide shipping slump and falling exports. When you factor in escalating insurance premiums and healthcare expenses, even families in Delaware's middle class are starting to break. Without a varied economy or a substantial tax base to fall back on, Delaware's dependence on Wall Street profits and a paper-based economy makes it one of the nation's most brittle. When the next recession lands, the state could swing from a budget surplus to a full-blown fiscal crisis in just a few months, proving that the smallest economies can sometimes fall the hardest. Number 4 is Maryland. On the surface, Maryland looks like a prosperous state, boasting a median household income of over $98,000, which is among the highest in the country. But that prosperity is almost exclusively clustered around Washington, D.C., leaving the state dangerously reliant on federal government spending. The moment a recession forces Washington to tighten its belt or enact a hiring freeze, Maryland's economy just seizes up. Nearly 30% of the state's entire workforce has jobs linked to the federal government, from defense contracting to administrative roles. The private sector simply isn't robust enough to absorb that kind of shock. The state has lost 20% of its manufacturing jobs over the last decade, and its small businesses contend with some of America's highest overhead costs. At the same time, Maryland is drowning in over $40 billion of debt, and its pension obligations are expected to swell by another $5 billion by 2026. The housing market, which once seemed like a rock of stability, is showing deep cracks. The average home prices soared to $445,000, and mortgage payments have leaped by 38% in only 2 years. In places like Montgomery and Prince George's counties, the number of late mortgage payments is ticking upward, particularly for the middle-income families who bought homes at the height of the market in 2021. Baltimore, which should be the state's economic powerhouse, is instead crumbling from crime, a shrinking population, and businesses fleeing the city. More than 20,000 people have abandoned the city since 2020, and the vacancy rate for downtown office space is now above 28%. The Port of Baltimore, a major trade artery that moves over $80 billion in goods each year, has suffered a sharp drop in export volume, thanks to a global slowdown and increasing automation. Maryland's heavy reliance on government paychecks and an overinflated housing bubble makes it extremely sensitive to a recession. When the layoffs start in Washington or federal contracts dry up, the negative effects will cascade throughout local communities, killing consumer spending. Despite its wealthy image, Maryland is teetering on a fiscal cliff where a single recession could wipe out decades of fragile growth. And at number 3, Illinois. Illinois is the very definition of a financial time bomb. The state is already functionally bankrupt, with $60 billion in overdue bills and an unfunded pension crisis exceeding $140 billion. Before a recession even begins, Illinois' credit rating is already the worst in the nation, sitting just a single step above junk status. Every dip in the market nudges it closer to total financial ruin. Its main economic driver, Chicago, is in deep trouble. More than 23% of its commercial real estate is vacant, and the value of downtown properties has collapsed by 35% since 2019. The tax income from these buildings is vanishing, just as violent crime, a corporate exodus are making the situation worse. Heavy hitters like Boeing, Citadel, and Tyson Foods have already pulled up stakes, taking tens of thousands of well-paying jobs with them. At the same time, homeowners are being buried by property taxes that average 2.1%, the second highest in the entire country. A median-priced home in Illinois might cost $295,000, but the property tax bill can easily top $6,000 a year, forcing families to flee. Since 2020, Illinois has watched over 340,000 of its residents leave, shrinking the tax base just as state costs are climbing. The manufacturing industry, once the state's lifeblood, is also in decline. The number of factory jobs has dropped by 15% in the last 10 years, and the major logistics centers near Joliet and Rockford are slowing down as shoppers buy less. With inflation continuing to chew through paychecks and the unemployment rate creeping towards 6%, Illinois is caught in a death spiral of less revenue, more debt, and a mass flight of its population. The state's habit of borrowing money just to pay for its pension promises and basic services makes it uniquely exposed. During a severe recession, its credit could be cut off entirely, triggering massive layoffs and service shutdowns everywhere. Illinois isn't just on the verge of collapse. The collapse is already happening in slow motion. When the next downturn arrives in full force, the financial bleeding will become a catastrophic economic hemorrhage that could change what a state-level bankruptcy looks like in America. Number 2, California. As the 5th largest economy on the planet, California is now teetering on the brink of a historic collapse. This is the story of its fall. The state's $5 trillion economy was built on pillars like real estate, tech, and entertainment, and all three are now crumbling. In Silicon Valley, the layoffs have been brutal, with more than 90,000 jobs vanishing since 2022 as giants like Meta, Google, and Tesla slash their payrolls by billions. San Francisco's downtown now feels like a ghost town, with office vacancies soaring to a record 36%, which is devastating for the city's property tax income. And the state's legendary housing market, once a point of pride, has become its greatest weakness. While the median home price is still an eye-watering $760,000 across the state, crippling 7% mortgage rates and skyrocketing insurance costs have pushed affordability to its lowest point in a 40-year span. The market is seizing up, home sales have plummeted 45% from their 2021 peak, and foreclosures are climbing, up 31% year over year, even in affluent areas like Marin and Santa Clara. An increasing number of homes are hitting the market, but nobody's buying. At the same time, people are leaving in droves. For 4 consecutive years, the population has declined, with the state losing more than 800,000 residents since 2020. It's not just people leaving. Businesses are packing up as well, citing crushing taxes and regulations. Major players like Oracle and Tesla, along with numerous other tech companies, have already moved their headquarters to states like Texas, Nevada, and Florida. This corporate flight has drained $56 billion in income from the state, a figure confirmed by IRS migration data. This is fueling a deepening budget crisis, and Governor Newsom's administration was recently forced to acknowledge a massive $68 billion deficit. This shortfall is a direct result of falling income tax revenues from the wealthy residents who are leaving. Add to that a homelessness crisis affecting over 180,000 people and record-high insurance costs, on top of severe water shortages that endanger its agricultural sector. The outlook for the Golden State is grim. If the next recession hits hard, California isn't just in for a downturn. It's facing a total collapse of its bloated economy, its tax base, and its entire image as the American dream. Number 1, Florida. For decades, Florida's economy ran on sunshine and tourists, but now all the signals are flashing red. The shiny facade of a booming population and luxury beachfront properties is hiding an economy on the brink of disaster. The tourism industry, the engine that powers a full 25% of the state's GDP, is sputtering. In 2025, hotel bookings have dropped by 18%, air passenger numbers are down 22%, and the flow of international visitors has decreased by almost 30%. Even the snowbirds retirees who flock here for the winter are staying away, priced out by inflation, impossible insurance rates, and soaring rents. This leads to the state's real estate market, which everyone thought was invincible, but it's now collapsing on itself. While the average home costs around $410,000, property insurance costs have exploded by an incredible 68% in just 2 years, with the typical policy now costing $6,000 per home each year. This has left thousands of homeowners unable to get coverage, as insurance companies pull out of the state entirely. Consequently, foreclosures have spiked by 39%, and the number of unsold homes is ballooning. In hotspots that were booming just yesterday, like Tampa, Fort Myers, and Orlando, this fantasy of endless growth is cracking as the state's infrastructure can't keep up. About 1,000 new residents arrive daily, yet the power grid, water supply, and roads are failing under the load. On top of that, rising sea levels are putting $2.9 trillion worth of coastal property at risk, and the financial toll from hurricanes has doubled since 2015, with Hurricane Ian by itself racking up $113 billion in damages. The job market is also showing signs of weakness, particularly in construction, hospitality, and retail. These sectors, which account for over 40% of all jobs in Florida, are starting to see layoffs as consumer spending dries up. In towns that live and die by tourism, like Kissimmee and Panama City Beach, businesses are shutting down at record rates. When a full-blown recession hits, Florida's entire economic model, a precarious mix of tourism, real estate speculation, and retirement funds, is set to crumble more spectacularly than anywhere else. The sandy beaches will still be there, but the promise of a prosperous life that attracted so many will be swept away by a tide of debt, environmental disaster, and broken dreams.